Let's talk a little bit about discovering your voice on the instrument. I get asked a lot about how to discover your voice on the instrument, and there are some very practical things you can keep in mind. The first thing to remember is that it takes time to develop your voice. When you're growing up, you learn how to speak quite early. It takes quite a while before you've had enough life experience and explored ideas in different ways before you start to really have a solid definition of and sense of who you are as a person. And the same thing is true musically. It's an approximate analogy, but it kind of fits. So the first thing to keep in mind, it helps to know what you want your voice to be. I've mentioned this in other lessons, and especially when it comes to developing your voice, one should really, I think of it as projecting into the future, looking forward with hindsight. Think about the player you want to be. Imagine what does your ideal musical self sound like. And don't be afraid to draw from your influences. Don't be afraid to say, I want to slap like Victor. I want to solo like Jocko. I want to, groove like Derek Hodge. I want to, be able to, whatever it is. Take those things and draw them into yourself and think, okay, so that gives you that already gives you a rough idea of what you want to sound like. Think about what types of gigs you want to be doing. Do you want to be in one band doing one thing and crushing it, or do you want to be a freelance person who plays a little bit of everything? Think about your who you aspire to be musically speaking, and that'll help you to reverse engineer the process a little bit. The more clearly you can see what you're shooting for and what you're going for, the easier it is to look back and say, oh, okay, the difference between this person and that person is that person has a better understanding of harmony, that person can read, that person knows more about Afro-Cuban music, whatever it is. And then it kind of gives you a little bit of a roadmap. So explore your ideal musical self. Project into the future. Think of that, 5 years from now. What do I want to sound like 10 years from now? When I grow up, who do I want to be when I grow up on the instrument? 2, don't be afraid of mistakes. You're not really pushing boundaries and pushing ideas and working beyond your boundaries if you're not making mistakes. Mistakes are a sure sign that you're treading into new waters and you're breaking through new barriers and exploring new territories. So embrace the mistakes as the opportunities to learn that they really are. Listen to everything. Music is music. Don't get locked into just one style. You can always have a preference. You can always have a thing. Be like, oh man, this is cool, that's cool, but that's the thing. That's fine. But explore other styles. You need to expand your palette, widen your perspective, broaden your perspective, see what else is out there, and give things a shot. I love just going down the YouTube rabbit hole or Spotify rabbit hole or whatever, just picking just like West African music and seeing what comes up, and then seeing what else is suggested after that. And then if I find somebody I like, I'm like, oh man, this guy is cool. And then I Google him and where's he coming from? Who else has he played with? Who did he listen to when he was growing up? You got to dig a little bit, do a little bit of research, explore those voices that you admire and see what got them to where they are. Imitate the masters. A lot of this comes down to transcription. When you find somebody you really want to emulate, you're like, man, I wish I could play bass like this person over here. Imitate them. Try to sound like them as much as you can. Study their articulation and their note choices and their groove ideas and their rhythmic phrasing, and get inside of them. Transcribe little snippets, little licks you love, add them to your bag of tricks. Transcribe grooves. I was told a student of mine, he said, man, I wish I could just, I want to know how to play, like Stevie Wonder, man, all his bass lines are so great. How do you learn to do that? I was like, well, you could start by learning an entire album, learn your favorite Stevie album. There's a good place to start. Take songs in the key of life and learn every bass line, whether it's Stevie's left-hand bass line or Nate Watts, whoever it is. Side note, Nate Watts has played with Stevie, recorded with Stevie, and played with Stevie since Songs in the Key of Life. Dude scored a good gig. Imitate those things that you love. And don't worry about, I don't want to just sound like a Jocko clone or a Victor clone or a Nate Watts clone. You kind of can't. There's so much that goes into a sound. Their influences, their physiology, the way their hands fit on the instrument, the way they play, the angles of their fingers. You're not, there are some people that can really sound like Jocko and some people that can really sound like, but it's few and far between. For the most part, you can't help but have your own take on things. You can't help but sound like you, at least a little bit, when you're doing them. So don't sweat that so much. Just learn as much as you can, take as much as you can from this influence of yours and absorb it. And then as you get into other things, that'll always be there, but then you're going to meld it with this other thing that you got into, and the two are going to come together into some completely and entirely new thing that might just be your thing. You can't help but sound like you as much as you don't want to. I had a moment. I can't remember if I've told this story in a lesson before or not, but Rich Brown, one of my favorite bass players on the planet, he was in Portland gigging, and I'd been a fan of his for a while, and we had actually talked online a couple of times. But he was coming to town. I was like, oh man, I'd love to take you out to coffee or something, if you have time, just to meet you. And man, the dude is so sweet. Long story short, he came over to my house and we kicked it in the living room for a little while, played a little bass, and he actually went to a club that I played at a lot, and I played drums. He played bass. Like, we sat in with the band. It was a memorable day. But the defining moment with regard to this conversation was when he had his bass, his Ken Lawrence 6-string that I've always associated with that sound. I was like, man, maybe I just need a Ken Lawrence and I'll be able to sound like Rich. And he had the bass in my living room, and I was like, I kind of got to play your bass. And I handed him my bass, completely different. I was playing a Zahn, I think at the time, a Zahn 6-string, graphite neck, completely different bass, just different electronics, different neck materials. I mean, nothing similar. His Ken Lawrence, I picked it up, wide spacing. The strings were like jacked way off the fretboard. I mean, it wasn't like unplayable or anything, but it wasn't set up how I was used to. And I was thinking, oh, maybe that's the part of the secret, Okay, so maybe I'm like paying attention to everything, thinking this is how you get this sound. You get this bass set up like this, and that's it. And again, long story short, I started playing his bass. I just sounded like me. And it was crushing. He started playing my bass, and man, he still sounded like Rich. He sounded exactly like he did on every album that I flipped out over, every solo I've transcribed. I was like, man, all right, I guess there it is. It doesn't matter what you're playing, you're going to sound like you. And at the time, I just thought, damn, I want to sound like him. I don't like the way I sound. But I used it as inspiration to keep working and keep developing my sound and to get more into articulations and learn to try and get his sound on my bass. So I realized it's in the fingers. It's how he's playing it. It's not the bass. Oh man, it's already there. I just need to learn how to get it out of there. And that was kind of a defining moment for me. I learned a lot about articulation and sound in that moment because I started exploring it with more intensity, more intention. So there you go. And I've said this in any number of lessons. Practice playing musically when you're practicing. Every time you have the instrument in your hands, no matter what you're playing, whether it's a C major scale or a Bach prelude or a cello suite or a timba bass line, play it as musically as you can. Phrase, dynamics, swell, articulations, everything. I don't care if you're just playing pentatonic scales. Make those pentatonic scales sing. It's music. You're practicing. You're not just practicing muscle memory and practicing scales. You're practicing playing music in the shed. So no matter what you do in the shed, do it musically. And final note, explore rhythm as much as you explore harmony and bassline development and grooves and all of that stuff. Really get inside the rhythm, because the rhythm is usually what makes the harmony feel good and sound good. You've heard me say it on probably almost every lesson. All the right notes in the world won't save you if it doesn't feel good. And there's more that goes into feel than rhythm, but rhythm is a huge part of it. You can't have good feel without good rhythm. So focus on the rhythm. Don't just consider it a byproduct, and don't just think you're working on rhythm because you play your scales with the metronome. No, really get into the subdivisions and get into phrasings and explore where you put rests just as much as you explore where you put notes. You dig inside of it. Think like a drummer. Practice like a drummer. Practice like a percussionist. Learn percussion patterns on your bass. Learn drum solos on your bass. Figure out different ways to incorporate the different influences. And rhythmic influences are just as heavy as harmonic influences. It's not just all notes. We're the bridge between the drummer and the rest of the band. So we got to kind of have a foot on either end of that stream. I don't know if that analogy fits, but there it is. No plan, no hibbity-hibbity, but some important concepts. And hopefully things that'll help you along in your journey and things to keep in mind. And if you keep these guidelines in your mind as you are figuring out what you want to practice and what you want to work on, they will very much help to steer and guide your path. And having a clear and defined path is kind of key to seeing results on the other side of that. So, happy shedding, play with intention, play musically.